Hello, my fellow carbon printed meat golems. This is the artist formerly known as King of the Freaks, and today I will be bringing you another book, I suppose summary, recommendation, review, whatever. This book was recommended to me by someone named Emily. She recommended Voltaire to me, specifically the book called Candide, and so that's what I'm gonna read. I'm going chapter by chapter, so if you don't like book reviews, get off my lawn. And this one might take 2 or 3 releases, and I'm not going to release them in reverse chronological order, so you're just going to have to watch them backwards. Chapter 1, confirmation bias, runs throughout this chapter. I'm not going to go it's not going to be very formal. Some of them I'll pick at, some of them I'll just summarize. That's how I do it. Okay, but they come straight out of the gate in this book in chapter 1 of Candide by Voltaire with what's his name? Pangloss, I think it is. He comes straight out of the gate with confirmation bias, logical incongruity, irrational optimism, and the best of all possible worlds being an informal logical fallacy. I would argue that the world contains an amount of suffering too great to justify dispositional optimism, nor does the world contain sufficient amounts of pleasurable conditions to warrant dispensational pessimism. Okay, to me, I like a more balanced approach. All right. And I would personally assert that both of the aforementioned psychological dispositions are half correct and half incorrect. Furthermore, my reckoning is that it is the same with philosophical pessimism and philosophical optimism as well. Alright, that's pretty much my intro for chapter 1, right? If anyone needs a list of logical fallacies, I'll probably hyperlink one. Also, he went over the pretense of nobility, which is to say, oh, their house was noble and they're all noble. But the thing is what do they say? There's a difference between having class and having money and having class. I would agree with that. And so there's a pretense of nobility here. Pretense of insight of knowledge, like thinking something is true even if it's just probable. There's a lot of fat people, obese people. Let's see. Demonization of the male sexuality only, coming straight out of the gate. That's why Candide got ran off from the manor or whatever. That was so great. Was because he put eyes on what's her name, and it was like, yeah, but she didn't do anything. Okay, right. So, and then the false pretense of belonging. Candide thought he belonged, and he was just in with everybody, and then they just tossed him aside. And then so they exiled him after he was messing around with what's her name, and then and he was otherwise innocent but male and a youth at the time. And so it was just like, okay, they basically yawed with the fire like he was Frankenstein. He didn't even do nothing. So they were basically, and it was all for stuff that was never disallowed. Alright, so that's basically not only the whole story in a nutshell, so if you want to jump out, do that, but that was also chapter 1, okay? Chapter 2, pretense of generosity was a big topic here. Pretense of charity, pretense of freedom, pretense of choice, a lot of assumption and errors of a thing rather than the thing itself, a lot of projection of strength without attaining of it, very common in the present day. Involuntary conscription of men was a subject, especially boys, of course, boys, but never women and girls, of course. Torture as persuasion was given. Like, one does not simply persuade someone with torture. They just get them to do it. That's not like internal persuasion. It's more like getting them to act, not to believe. Human free will is a topic that comes up a lot here in this chapter. Free will is the ability to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded. So there's an illusion or pretense of free will that goes around. Free will is closely linked to the concepts of responsibility, praise, guilt, sin, and other judgments, which apply only to actions that are freely chosen. That's why I say torture is not a good way to persuade. And self-determination, of course, is a subject here. It states that people, based on respect for the principle of equal rights and fair equality of opportunity, have the right to freely choose their sovereignty and international political status with no interference. The opposite of determinism is some kind of indeterminism, otherwise called non-determinism. Determinism is often contrasted with free will. Alright, so the torture was a form of determinism. Determinism often is taken to mean causal determinism, which in physics is known as cause and effect. Somewhat different from moral determinism, let's say. Chapter 3, Survival of Death. Survival of death was the topic here, and being welcomed with disdain by strangers and countrymen alike was also. Christian people and heathen people both being uncharitable and indistinguishable from one another, Christian and heathen. That's my own experience backs that up. Actually, the Christians are arguably worse. Well, no, they both have their strengths and weaknesses, but they get pretty bad on the bad end, both of them. Just different. Let's see, homelessness, being a jailable offense. That's a common problem, one I've had myself, because of everything's owned and trespassing fees and all this. Loitering. I've stopped to pick stickers out of my shoe and almost got a ticket over it because I was in a rich neighborhood. I was like, well, they got the stickers on no sidewalk. Burrs, whatever they're called, the pokey things. Okay, so charity and, more importantly, economic and employment instruction being totally absent was a problem in this chapter 3. And being overwhelmed with cruelty and indifference of many was also a thing in this chapter. I've experienced that myself a lot. The arrogant, chapter 4, the arrogant and complacent are sometimes destroyed by being so arrogant and complacent, and in accordance with time and chance that besets us all. The nature of revenge is not availed otherwise than crude satisfaction by revenge, and that which is lost may never be gained again. Alright, so that was the subject in this chapter. How love, if it is ever present and otherwise than illusory, is often the downfall of the everyman. And getting pen gloss. Okay, so love is often the man's downfall, even though I believe it to be an illusion brought on by chemistry, and affection, mere affection. So like a dog loves me the same as a person would. But the person believes the illusion, the dog just lives it. Getting a sexually transmitted disease from sleeping with a woman who neglected to mention her condition was the subject in this chapter. Something I've strived to avoid. Even like, okay, HPV, the only way to test for it is if the person's already having especially the woman is already having a immune response, and the only way to get that is to be all up around her, and then by then you're more than likely to have already got it. So it's nigh indetectable unless you're with the woman for a long time and get her pap smeared over and over. So yeah, HPV is pretty bad, but I don't know what he caught. But anyway, she didn't bother to tell him. Okay, so what else? Chapter 4, all things being subsequently all things that occur being subsequently necessary, and all too common appeal to ignorance was present in this chapter, which is of course a logical fallacy, appeal to ignorance and believing that things must be the way they are, not necessarily. The best of all worlds, again, utopian thinking was a philosophical subject in this chapter. And again, being bested in the realization that sin is not necessary but contingent, the result of free will, and again, that metaphysical necessity which is to say divine will, and human free will are not incompatible or contradictory. All right, that was a subject that's what would be my summation of the problems that came up, whereas they were actually pushing the more naive, incorrect side of that. The fallacious reasoning that specific instances, like bad things, for instance, inevitably lead to good things made by the character Dr. Pangloss. I keep saying pin, but I probably should say Pangloss. Okay, is an appeal to probability, right? Or a statement that takes something for granted because it would probably be the case or might be the case. So bad doesn't necessarily lead to good just because good happened. See, chapter 5. James the Anabaptist learned. Well, he learned quite a bit, but let's see. In exchange for his own life, he learned that before one seeks to charitably rescue another, one is first obliged to deliver oneself from that self-same possibility. As the Stoic philosopher Impertator I think I got that right. Impertator Caesar Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, wow, that's a lot. Augustus, okay, I thought I was done there. He's got 5 names. In Book 4, in Chapter 2 of his work entitled Meditations, wrote the following: "Let no act be done at haphazard, nor otherwise than according to the finished rules that govern its kind." I always liked that one. Couldn't really say his name, didn't really know his work, but I always knew that saying. Well, I knew it for a long time. Here in this chapter 5, Dr. Pangloss brings up a concept called universal reason. Universal reason being something that philosophers think is at the bottom of a thinking system that allows it to understand certain natural things that are generally complex. Dr. Pangloss, in stating that it is not good for Candide to go about wine-bibbing and womanizing, although he had survived death many times over and was among the ruins of calamity at that very time, and choosing to live a little, shall we say, belies his erroneous conflation of a priori knowledge and Dr. Pangloss's true source of counsel, that knowledge which is a posteriori, if I said that right, in nature, right? So he's confusing a priori or pre-known and a posteriori or known afterward knowledge. A priori knowledge or justification is independent of experience. That's important to know. As with mathematics, like 3 + 2 = 5, tautologies, an example being all bachelors are married, and deduction from pure reason, as an example, ontological proofs. A posteriori knowledge or justification depends on experience. A priori, no experience. A posteriori needs experience, okay? Or empirical evidence, as with most aspects of science and personal knowledge, okay? Experience. Dr. Pangloss goes further to posit that the origin of sin is a necessary evil, as though but God didn't create evil. Rather, the devil created evil, according to the biblical narrative, whom God himself created and gave free will. Although they weren't supposed to take it up because they were angels. That's what they refer to when they say leaving their abode. Just because they can make a choice doesn't mean they were given permission to do so, and that's basically what happened. So, okay, I don't believe that there is such thing as necessary evil. However, not only did God not necessarily intend for evil to come about, nor did it comprise the best possible choice, godly or otherwise. And so God did not necessarily intend for evil to come about. And it is not necessarily good for evil to exist. And evil does not serve us any greater good or lesser bad, so to me it's not necessary. Allow me to illustrate this using a version of the Epicurean paradox pertaining to the so-called problem of evil, wherein my answers follow his Okay, well, if you go, actually just go see my video, Redshift Paradox, Epicurean Paradox, and it'll go over the questions that Epicurus poses with the problem of evil, and then I basically slapped that down pretty easily. Chapter 6, we're about, halfway through, give or take. Oh, chapter 8 rather, chapter 8, that was chapter 7, I just finished. Naturally, when a certain soldier happened to cut the face of Candide, which is Candide's, I guess, woman, this guy kidnapped her and cut her face, I guess, to teach her a thing or two. And then this dude jumps up, his captain, and then kills the guy, right? For I guess, cutting his woman. And I don't mean Candide either, because Candide was trying to wipe her up, and then she, I guess, gets stole from somebody. Gets stole, yeehaw. So, okay, so yeah. She becomes, like, I guess, this guy's love slave, and then this dude's gonna rape her, and he cuts her face, and then he's like, oh, you don't cut her face, and then he kills the guy, right? And then takes her for his own Betty. And I was like, what? So you're gonna kill him over that, instead of just saying one does not simply cut the face of the broad who I'm wanting to bang? So they just pulled rank, was like, this is my young thing. And she gets passed around, and she maintains during the whole time she's recounting this story. Candide is recounting this story, or whatever her name is. She's going on and on about how she was a good girl, and she resisted the best she could, and she used to be, she was pretty, and everybody liked her, but she just pushed them away. She was faithful, and something about my heart. And so basically good girl status confirmed, And then, okay, while she's recounting the story, in walks one of the dudes, this Jewish Don, who was like, it was his turn, because this captain, or this one guy, was like this inquisitor, and this Jewish Don were like trading her off, like, they get like half a week each, and they're just banging her and slanging her, basically, like in rotation. And then while she's telling Candide this, after Candide's been adventuring, he's been doing all the adventures. Oh yeah, did I already say that? I don't know if I went over that. I might have just flew straight through part of it, but whatever. It doesn't matter. Go read the book. So anyway, dude walks in talking about it's Wednesday or whatever. I'm here to bang. What's her name? And then Candide's just like poke with the stick. He killed him. Right? And I was like, dang, you just murdered him, son. Okay, but I thought it was funny because he was all territorial, like, that's my Betty stick. It's just like, dude, she's getting passed around, homie. She's getting passed around. And then Candide had just finished his supper with his love interest after busting it, or I almost said busting a cab, he stabbed that dude. And then in comes the Don talking about the Inquisitor talking about, okay, it's my turn. And then he comes in and then talking about, oh, thou bitch of a Galilean, to that woman, talking about, was not the Inquisitor enough for thee? Must this rascal also share thee with me? Talking about Candide. So we got like it's a cockfight going on, and long story short, Candide pokes him too, and was like, and there was this old woman, I guess, that found Candide after he was like sick or something, and she nursed him back to health, and she happened to know Candide, who had been passed around to everybody. And so yeah, it got ugly, but Candide poked him. Well, he's like somebody, right? He's like with the church, and so they had to flee and take off. And so that's chapter 10. Chapter 10, that was chapter 9, this is chapter 10. While overnighting in the inn that they ran to, a religious man, a friar crept into their shared room and basically robbed them blind, right? And I thought that was kind of interesting because he was a Christian and he just robbed them straight blind. And yeah, and then went on to a larger town where Candide landed a position as a captain of a company of footmen using the military drills that he got from the Bulgarian guys that captured him, I think, in chapter 2 and taught him like military moves and stuff. But Pangloss, what led to him getting robbed was Pangloss's socialist and utopian theory that the goods of this world are common to all men, and that each has an equal right to them. Basically, mi casa es su casa is why he got robbed, because he didn't even bother to lock his door. Okay, so that's socialism right there. And that may have provided the slack-handedness required to forego locking up, and the blindness of psychological optimism without its balancing opposite, psychological pessimism, or actually it's called dispensational optimism and pessimism, and philosophical optimism and pessimism. The psychological often refers to dispensational, but they get kind of conflated, and I don't want to do that too much. But okay, it's like if you're gonna keep your hands down, you're gonna get socked out. You need to keep your guard up. All right, so chapter 11. Let's see if I can fly through this, man. I don't even know. The old woman that was with them was the daughter of a pope. She goes through a long story in chapter 11, talking about how she was so beautiful and everybody was just thirsting after her, and she was the hottest thing you ever done heard of. And everybody just wanted to hit that, and they didn't never want to quit that. And then she was basically like, and then she got passed around to Africa, and she was like tripping because of how savage and dumb the Africans were, and basically how they're like cannibals and this and that. And she wasn't a virgin for long, that's for sure. And now her trade value went down. And then she witnessed the dumbest race on earth and how violence prone they were, and how they kept more, there's more slaves. Caucasian people abolished slavery, and every other race still has slaves today, and more than we ever did. See the global slavery index and world slavery map, current world slavery map. So she basically, but back then it was even worse. So she saw that. Basically, she started out a princess and wound up a pauper, I guess, or whatever. And she's ugly. She was hideous by then. Chapter 12. The man brought, what's her name? The old woman, I guess, she's still going through her story about how we was princesses. And then this old man, a white man, found her, right? She was in the desert after the black people, I guess, was going to kill her, and she took off running. Because the Muslims was eating each other. The inbred Muslims was eating each other, and it got bad, and so she took off. But anyway, she got thirsty and fell asleep in the desert, so to speak. And then this white guy comes and finds her. And then, as it happened, he was in such a state that it's too evil for any woman to endure, which is to say that the man that rescued her had been castrated and rendered an eunuch, I think it's called, which is a fate only fit for men and boys, naturally, by the inbred Muslims. They do that. It makes them feel strong, They're basically women. So consequently, a man absent his genitals from a feminine perspective is the perfect man, because he wishes only to serve, is docile and yet stronger than a woman, and offers or asks for no reciprocal action. Thus, it's a dream of every woman, provided that she already has children. The eunuch told part of his story to the young lady as follows, now the old lady. I was born in Naples, and where they geld some boys, and some die in operation, 2,000 or 3,000 children every year. Others acquire a voice more beautiful than women, and others are raised in offices of state. This operation was performed on me with great success, and I was chapel musician to Madame Princess of Palestrina. And then the old woman, now the young woman, then cries out, "Oh, to my mother, your mother," he cried, weeping. "Can you be that young princess whom I brought up until the age of 6 years, and who promised so early to be as beautiful as you?" Of course, it was her to which he referred. And yes, men without testicles become crying, whining, useless wimps, much like all women. The former princess of an old lady then went on to say how she was passed around and a slave and blah 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 by the inbred Muslims and blah 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 in like 10 different countries, and basically she was like, "I waxed old in misery and disgrace, having only having only one half of my posterior, I forgot to say the inbred Muslims ate one of her butt cheeks. How messed up is that? And then basically she's like, oh yeah, you know, I had me about 3-4 Negroes, about 3-4 Englishmen, a couple of Germans, here and there, and then bam, now I'm old and used up, tossed aside. Chapter 13. Well, as it happened, the old woman had her victim status befitting any damsel, and she made it well known. Afterward, Candide, Candide's love interest, took all the stories of every passenger they were traveling at the time, and because okay, well, I think I skipped over it, but Candide found a boat ton of money. He pretty early wound up in the city of gold, El Dorado, and he basically, him and, oh wait, I don't think I've got to that part yet. Maybe not. Either way, he found a bunch of money, and then so they basically go hopping around a lot, and so that's how they are able to pay for this. But the idea is that Candide took everybody's story because she was real into like stories and whatever, and then they made like marriage plans and you know whatever, and they were gonna sell the Grand Inquisitor's jewelry, who what's his name had poked, who Candide had killed, and he was promptly hung. Okay, meaning to say, what's his name? Pangloss, I think it was. No, it was the fat friar who robbed him. He was the one who, okay, he hasn't found the treasure yet. Spoiler. I'll do spoilers. Okay, so the fat friar, I guess, went to sell the Inquisitor's jewelry that he stole from them, which they stole from him, and then he got hung for it, okay? So I thought that was kind of accurate and kind of ironic. So having been discovered trying to sell the Grand Inquisitor's jewelry, what's his name was promptly hung, the friar. However, before he snitched on Candide, Candide, and the old haggard princess, both of whom promptly pointed the finger at Candide, and through their deliverer, who saved their lives, by the way, their white knight shining armor that shone directly under the wagon train, and retired in comfort, as is the way of all women. And the wise King Solomon in the Holy Bible made note, there may be one upright man amongst 1,000, but among all that were counted, not one upright woman was to be found. So Candide the noble fled for his life, and lest he be burned at the stake like a human matchstick for stealing what's his name's jewelry, and there was not a moment to lose. But how could he part from Candide, and where could he flee for shelter? Okay, so I don't think I jumped ahead and spoiled a bit, but we're on chapter 14. I got this. Yeah, but they threw him straight under the bus. I remember laughing. I was like, yep, saw that coming. The loyal, obviously male servant of Candide answered his question like this: by St. James of Compostela, St. James of Compostela, said Cacambo, that was his name. You were going to fight against the Jesuits. Let us go to fight for them. He was fighting against them, I think, in the Bulgarian army. I know the road well, he said. I'll conduct you to their kingdom, where they will be charmed to have a captain that understands the Bulgarian exercise. You'll make a prodigious fortune. If we cannot find our account in one world, then we shall find it in another. It is a great pleasure to see and do new things, he said. The kingdom is upwards of 300 leagues in diameter and divided into 30 provinces. There the fathers possess all, and the people nothing. It is a masterpiece for reason and justice, he said. For my part, I see nothing so divine as the Jewish fathers, for the record, who there make war upon the kings of Spain and Portugal, and in Europe confess those kings, who here kill Spaniards, and in Madrid send them to heaven. This delights me. Let us push forward. You are going to be the happiest of mortals. This is where the following by happenstance was uttered. I am from the dirty province of Westphalia, said Candide. I was born in the castle of Thunderton Tronk. Oh heavens, is it possible? Cried the commandant, who they were talking to when they got there. They found a guy. What a miracle, he cried Candide. Is it really you? Said the commandant. It is not possible, said Candide. They drew back and they embraced. They shed rivets of tears. What is it? What is it, you, Reverend Father? You, the brother of the fair Candide? Okay, so basically, Candide threw him under the bus and stayed there with that religious dude who was like a bishop or something, okay? That's his, like, woman, I guess. And then they leave, and then he finds her brother, okay? Long story short, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're palling it up, and Candide's Candide's telling him about what happened with Candide and all this. Well, okay, chapter 15. What's his name gets to talking to what's his name? Candide gets to talking to about Candide, which is dude's sister, right? And he's got money, and he's like all special and important. And then Candide says, oh, I want to marry her. Well, that's when this dude pulls rank and is like, you ain't fisting to marry my sister because you're not a baron. And he's like, dude, she's a sex slave. And what? So you're saying I can't marry her? And then basically he was like, yeah, because you ain't a baron. And then she's too good for you. And he was like, but she's been getting passed around. And then basically he got mad and just killed him too. And then so he runs off. Chapter 16, he's done runned off with his boy, what's his name, Cacambo. And Cacambo and he are in chapter 16, are eating their food, and they see this woman being chased by these two women naked, being chased by these apes and harangued by them and stuff. And then they bust a cap on them, thinking that they're, you know, like trying to eat them or hurt them. And it turns out that was their sex friends or whatever. Their husbands were apes, essentially. All right, we're gonna say it like that. And then basically, all right, that's basically chapter 16. All right, chapter 17. Basically, the best of all worlds. Okay, so there's a lot of philosophy coming up in these, which I'm skipping over most of it, but it's not hard to pick out, okay, if you read the book. But basically what happened was he busted a cap on them monkeys. They were like, oh, we ain't having it, tied him up, was gonna burn him. And then they thought he was a Jesuit, so they were gonna kill him. And then they figured out, oh snap, he's not a Jesuit. And then they untie him and let him go. And then in chapter 17, then that is taken as by Cacambo and Candide as being the best of all worlds confirmed, because it couldn't happen any other way, right? Like I killed him, and then now this happened, and now that happened, and it's all for the best. And it's like, yeah, but if it went a different way, it wouldn't have been. So they're pretty naive. But yeah, in chapter 17, so okay, that's whenever in chapter 17 they go traveling, trying to get, I forget where they was trying to get to, but okay, they're heading back to Europe because I think they were in Spain at that time or something. Wait, no, that don't make sense. Where were they? I don't remember where they were, but they ended up in South America somehow, like on a boat. And then they, I guess, are running around in Peru, and they stumble on, what's it called? El Dorado, the Golden City. Long story short, it's like a perfect kingdom, like drenched in golden rubies, all through chapter 17. And then chapter 18, they meet this sage that lives there, and his whole house is covered in gold, and he's like real smart and nice, and like, it's like perfect, basically. Because it's basically playing up the noble savage myth, where it's like, oh, if you didn't colonize them with then they wouldn't be crazy. Well, here's the thing. If they left their area, they would immediately, it's like, okay, they had like diamonds and jewelry and gold everywhere, but to them that was just dirt and rocks. So it didn't mean the same thing for them. So here it was like noble savage, and all they do is eat, drink, and live in their luxury. But to them, it's not luxury; it's just stuff, right? So they eventually, Candide and his boy Cacambo, take the king's generosity and get all this gold and jewelry and stuff. And when they leave, the second they leave there, you know, they start losing sheep and whatever left and right. They call them sheep, but I think they're alpaca. But they start losing them. But they're rich. They're richer than, you know, with all them jewels and stuff and gold. They're richer than the richest kings and emperors. You know, they're like God Emperor rich. And then, okay, that's about chapter 19. Let's see. He's with a guy named Martin by now. I should have said that Cacambo's already become a slave by then. Or no. Yeah. I think he was a slave by then already. But chapter 20, yeah, they're bouncing in and out of slavery, almost all of them. The old philosopher that he had met by then named Martin, who he needed like some help with some stuff, so he hired him with what little monies he had. And then after that they fell into a river, and then came out in El Dorado. And then basically they had so much money that it was just obscene. And then basically they're losing money left and right, and Candide's just running around throwing diamonds at people, talking about, oh, every little thing that happens is, oh, here's a diamond, here's a diamond. And Martin is a Manchurian, which explained the existence of evil with a flawed creation, in which God took no role in forming, but rather was a result of Satan striking out against God. Humanity, the world, and the soul are seen as the byproduct of the battle between God's proxy, primal man, and Satan. And the human person is seen as a battleground for these powers. The soul defines the person, but it is under the influence of both light and dark. As the characters themselves proclaimed, there are, however, some things good, said Candide. That may be, said Martin, but I know them not. Essentially, this guy's a philosophical and dispositional pessimist, Martin. Alright, so we're at chapter 21. Hopefully I can get through this with just one take. The destruction, or the destination rather, as was necessary, had to be France for them, because Candide intended to make his way to Italy, and from there at length they basically set out for France. The reason they're doing that is because they want to go pick up Candide or Cundigan, right? But they can't go directly there because Candide had been run off for murdering that religious guy. Okay, so they have to take the roundabout way. And then he said essentially that, okay, what was I saying? Okay, Martin was saying that the world has been formed, or Candide asked Martin why the world was formed, and he essentially said to plague us to death, Martin did. And he said, are you not greatly surprised, continued Candide, at the love with which these two girls of the Orelos had for those monkeys, of which I have already told you? And he said, not at all. I do not see that passion that their passion was strange. I have seen so many extraordinary things that I have ceased to be surprised. Do you believe, says Candide, that men have always massacred each other as they do today? That they have always been liars, cheats, traitors, ingrates, brigands, idiots, thieves, scoundrels, gluttons, drunkards, misers, envious, ambitious, bloody-minded, calumniators, debauches, fanatics, hypocrites, and fools? And then Martin said, do you believe that hawks have always eaten pigeons where they have found them? And then Candide said, yes, without a doubt. Martin said, well then, if hawks have always had the same character, why should you imagine that men have changed theirs? Oh, said Candide, there's a vast deal of difference for free will. And they went on reasoning thus until they arrived at Bordeaux in France. Chapter 22. Candide and Martin were to go straight to Venice, and so they hitched a coach to accomplish that, but they ended up stopping and being robbed and confused, or Martin went into a story about being robbed there and being confused as a robber, and then subsequently being imprisoned in Paris. They were going to Venice to pick up what's her name, Candide, or I mean Cundagone. But basically, and Candide had lost several of his sheep, but he still had a bunch, and he donated one of them to France because they couldn't be carrying around all of them. And the people thought, because it was a red sheep, an alpaca, that it must be rotting. Stupid. But hey, must be true. And essentially, what happened was they got to messing around in Paris and got robbed blind, because Candide was like super duper generous, where he's like, oh, everybody with the sob story gets 15 diamonds, and it was like, dude, you're hemorrhaging money, Broseph. But basically, they were getting scammed. But like this fat chick posed as Cundagone because this guy was telling him over a game of cards, telling Candide, just pumping him for information essentially. And he said, oh, well, has Cundagone ever sent you a letter? And he was like, no, but I wish he would. Next thing you know, he gets a letter from her, supposedly. And then she's right there in the city in Paris, right where Martin said, hey, I got robbed and beaten and all this. Maybe we should just go straight to Venice. Nope, he's got to hang out in Paris. And then so he did, and man, he got robbed blind. But he made it out, chapter 23. Eventually he did, but even with some of his money still. But he was just easy come, easy go. And then in chapter 23 starts out, Pangloss, Martin. My dear Cundagone, what sort of world is this? Said Candide on board the Dutch ship, which they were now on. Something very foolish and abominable, said Martin. After seeing an English admiral killed for not killing enough French soldiers at first arrival in Portsmouth, Candide was so shocked and bewildered that he saw of what he had saw and heard, that he could not set foot on shore, and he made a bargain with the Dutch skipper. Were he even to rob him like the Syrian captain he got robbed. That's why I said he lost a bunch of sheep. He got robbed. To conduct him without delay to Venice. The skipper was ready in 2 days. At last they landed in Venice, where what's her name was. Chapter 24. At the arrival in Venice, Candide went in search of Cacambo at every inn and coffee house, but he was unable to find him. And he basically asked everybody about him. Essentially, he ended up in Venice to go to Carnival and was there with all kinds of princes and stuff. And then that's when Cacambo showed up, and all these princes, dozens of them, or at least 5 or 6, showed up and were going to Venice for the fair. But Cacambo was a slave there. He lost all his fortune. He was richer than an emperor, right? Richer than 50 kings, and he lost it all and became a slave so fast. And then Candide was there looking for him, and he found him, and he was sitting at a table with a bunch of princes who lost their fortunes too. So that's basically how it went down. Let's see, chapter 25. Let's see. Oh yeah, so they got on a gondola to Britannia, and arrived at the place of the noble Singor Hokakariot. I don't know. And then, basically they meet this guy who's has a really nice land and really nice everything, and Candide's still pretty rich. The master of the house was a man of 60 and very rich at first. Basically he has pretty girls everywhere, and he's a senator, and they're there to talk to him because he's already in Venice, right? And this guy is like super rich, old money, but he's like not satisfied with anything. And he's basically like the rich Martin. He's just like, it's meh, everything's meh. The paintings aren't painty enough, the books aren't booky enough. He's basically dissatisfied. And Candide was like, that's a bit much, don't you think? But Martin was like, yep, I agree. And then basically they were just like, everything's feudal, and screw it. And I think that they're both biased, but I thought it was funny because Candide's like super duper optimistic for no reason. And then chapter 26. One evening, Candide and Martin were going to sit down to supper with some foreigners, and essentially, They had lodged in the same inn, and a man whose complexion was as black as soot came behind Candide and grabbed him. And like I said, it was Cacambo in chapter 26. And he finally found Cacambo after talking to that old man for a good while. And that's when he met the 5 kings and heard how they lost their kingdoms. And basically Martin was like, yep, told you it was common for kings to lose everything. And then sure enough, it was. But Candide was all surprised. Chapter 27, Cacambo had already prevailed upon the Turkish skipper, who was to bring them there to go pick up what's her name. And the sooner, basically, this guy was a slave driver, a Muslim slave driver, being from Turkey. And he asked for like 3 or 4 or 5 times what the trip was worth. Okay, so he was a shystery type. And then basically that was about it. Okay, what's his name? At any rate, our protagonist found himself chatting with his bro Cacambo when the chapter comes to a close, and when the next opens, during a conversation with Cacambo, which goes over the past, the following was said. Indeed, he said to Cacambo, Candide did, if I had not seen Master Pangloss hanged, and if I had not had the misfortune to kill the Baron, I should think that it were they who were rowing. Well, it turns out it was them rowing, okay? They were slaves, all right? And so, okay, I'm getting about done here. They ended up being slaves, right? And then he frees them with boat tons of money, and then they turn around and all move in together, and they go pick up what's her name. Basically, he buys them out of slavery. Pangloss wasn't dead, and at the end of the day, they all get together, and in chapter 29 and 30, they all live together in this little shack, and the Jews set on them so hard and take their money so hard and so fast that they end up poor and poverty-stricken, even though they were richer than any kings, because they were, quote, set upon by the Jews, taxed and put into usury, which is excessive tax, which is messed up because in the biblical times it was said that you shouldn't charge a brother usury, but people took that too far and decided not to charge any tax. That's why you didn't have hardly any Christian bankers. Big mistake. But okay, chapter 29 and chapter 30 are basically Irony City, and by now his girlfriend Candide is super duper ugly. Bam, there it is. And they live poor as farmers the rest of their lives, from the top to the bottom. And Gottfried Leibniz's theory of, which is who Gottfried Leibniz is, Pangloss. The pre-established harmony was incorrect. I believe that his pretty much every theory was incorrect. Not all of them, but most of them. And that he has this thing about causation, under which every substance affects only itself, but that all the substances, both bodies and minds in the world, nevertheless seem to causally interact with one another because they have been programmed by God in advance to harmonize with each other. Leibniz's term for these substances was monads, which he described in his popular work. Now, I don't think that that was correct, but it's one way of looking at it, I suppose. But most of his theories, like the best of all possible worlds and necessary evil, were incorrect. But alright, that was some Candide for you right there. And for the record, Voltaire, don't care. This is your host, Forgotten Furian. I bow to no man. Believe it.